Eleanor Roosevelt had this great quote. She said that poor minds talk about other people, average minds talk about events, but great minds, they talk about ideas. Yeah, of course I believe in LGBT rights. Of course I believe in women's rights. Of course I believe in minority rights. You know why? Because they're all individual rights. We all have rights as individuals. General Smedley Butler, one of the most decorated American soldiers in all of history, wrote an entire book called War is a Racket. The value of the dollar has gone down by over 96% in the last 100 years. The Second Amendment is not there so that we can go outside and hunt rabbits. It's there to keep us free. And actually, I would argue that if anyone needs the Second Amendment, it's minorities. Historically, unarmed minorities fare the worst in all of history. Those are the genocides we all hear about. Look, violence is wrong, all right? Whether it's cops or whether it's riots, it's unacceptable in a civilized society. You know what really gets me is everyone knows that the largest polluter on Earth is the U.S. government. All right. So how are they the ones going to solve the problem? You know what's insane is we have the largest prison population in the entire world, and over half of them are for non-violent crimes. Welcome to the Take On Everything podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show for another week's episode of the Take On Everything. As always, I'm your host, James Cook, and I have been waiting for a while to actually do this election wrap-up episode. I think it was last Sunday. We did the pre-election episode, kind of like gave you a little bit of a synopsis of both candidates. My predictions, which I was wrong, by the way, not by much, but I was wrong. I was actually surprised at how close the election was. I think that episode I said I was guessing it was going to be Trump by a slim margin, even though the polls were double digits the other way. I think I saw up to leading up to that week, it was anywhere from 14 to 18 points in Biden's favor, which is a huge margin. It just seems like insane. Yet it was nowhere near that. There was a razor thin margins in almost every swing state. And actually election night, I went to one of, I have some politically active friends in the area, and went over and watched some of the early election results, and it looked like a landslide by Trump. And I was like, oh my goodness, how does this happen? As in just the complete opposite of what any kind of the polls were talking about. But as the absentee and mail-in ballots came in, it slowly went Biden's way, and it looks like they just declared Biden the presumptive nominee. So I was wrong, but I was taking that off chance guess, and it was way closer than I actually thought it was going to be. I thought either way it would probably be significant, but I think just how close it was for so many days. I'm a huge fan of memes, and so the memes on social media were kind of hilarious, just kind of ragging on Arizona or New Mexico. No, it was Nevada, because they're just taking their sweet time counting, like they just wouldn't even update. And I think North Carolina put out a statement that they were not going to update until the 12th. So everyone was sitting on the edge of their seat for pretty much all week. And you kind of saw a little bit of that frustration bleed out into social media, but it's definitely the most interesting. I didn't have really a horse in the race. I think I said dog in the fight last time, and I'm like, that's not what you want to say. So I didn't have a horse in the race. So I was kind of just an interested political spectator. And this election has been really fascinating for a lot of different reasons. And I think I haven't seen the results take that long to come out. And early on, I don't know if it's going to turn out to be this way. It sounds like there's a lot of litigation and legal lawsuits that are coming out of this in several states. But I think the last time that anything like this happened was 2000 with Bush Gore, where it was one state, Florida. It was by a couple thousand votes, and they ended up going back and forth with, the appeals court and Supreme Court of Florida and recounts and stopping the recounts, and it was just a mess. And we didn't actually get the results until December of that year. So that how that plays out is yet to be seen. But even if Trump concedes the election completely and does not pursue legal action, I think it will still be ranked as one of the more interesting elections as far as how wrong the polls were, how long the results took to get out. The increase in mail-in voting was immense. It was almost half of the people voted by mail. A little more than half, actually. So it's just a real shift and a really interesting election in history. I know most elections, they say, this is the most important election of our time. I wouldn't say it's the most important election of our time, but I would say it's one of the more interesting ones, just all of the different factors that are coming into play. So again, it looks like Biden is the nominee. We will see whether, I think Trump said he's going to pursue, I think there's an automatic recount in Georgia, if I remember correctly. I think it's anything under 0.25% difference is an automatic recount. So that looks like it could potentially be Pennsylvania, Georgia. I think Wisconsin was on the list. Arizona's still counting. They may actually flip. And I think Nevada is pretty far gone. I don't think there's an electoral path for Trump, but I do think that he may try to exploit a lot of the voter fraud accusations going around. Whether they're true or not, it's almost impossible to distinguish whether that is accurate or not. Though every election, people accuse each other of voter fraud. And usually after the fact, it's a lot less than was accused, but it is still legitimate. So I think it's irresponsible to say zero voter fraud ever happens, or also that, we can't trust any of the results because of voter fraud. I mean, if you're in that situation, it really just doesn't matter at that point. So I'm just going to hope we're not at that point. But if we are, then I mean, it kind of is what it is. But I'm going under the assumption, because you can't work with the assumption that none of the numbers are accurate, as in zero. Because if you do, then again, what is the actual point of voting, or is there a democracy, or is there a republic, or anything like that? So, operating under the assumption that there's probably some voter fraud, as there is with every election, it could be a little higher due to the increased turnout and the increased mail-in voting. I think it's irresponsible to say that it's impossible that that's the case. But I also think it's not quite accurate to say that none of the numbers matter, or that none of it is accurate. There was definitely some irregularities, and I'm sure that'll shake out. And I think that'll be one of the interesting things to see over the next couple weeks and months. But again, I think it's kind of pointless to argue about hypotheticals until we actually see everything shake out. But as it sits now, looks like a Biden presidency is on the horizon, and that should be an interesting change of pace. There's not a lot of things, I feel like. I think I touched on this in the last episode. There's not a ton that is going to change, but I think the main thing that I'm a little concerned about is the warfare state. I think under Trump it was not great, but not as bad as under Obama and Bush. And I am concerned that any would-be anti-war left that is still around, I think that they may be kind of lulled to sleep under a Biden presidency, just because he's a Democrat, and that seems to be where most of the anti-war energy exists. So I think that's my serious concern with Biden. But as far as just talking about it, a little bit of the irrationality that is maybe on social media or online, or just actually in person, it was kind of insane. I think after they announced, I think it was PA that flipped, there were literally people dancing in the streets, literally. There were people that were just openly celebrating. People running around and just yelling, PA flipped and Biden's, president. And it's just kind of like the irrational emotion. I think it's partially built up just how crazy this year was. and also like the what is it, 4 days that nobody knew what the results were. I think all of that kind of pent up energy stressed people out a lot, and so you got a lot of these crazy reactions. Some of the reactions I was just kind of perusing again because I'm kind of like a connoisseur of political sentiment. I enjoy looking at it and seeing just some of the how far people go and how much emphasis they put on the presidency. I feel like local elections are much more important at people's everyday lives, yet people put so much stock into who the president is that it's this level of irrationality that I think is almost to a dangerous point. I think media has a lot to do with it, whether it's conservative or liberal media. They kind of plant these fear tactics out there just to get people so riled up to where you can't even have a decent conversation with anyone anymore, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. I think that bodes well for politicians. It helps political parties. It strengthens them. It solidifies their base. It helps media companies because people are tuning in to whether you're a CNN person or a Fox News person, that's all you go to. And the other guys are bad and they're lying to you. And, they're out to get this, whether it's, I think during the campaign, it was like, Donald Trump's going to oversee a genocide of LGBT people, and Biden is going to destroy the economy and put everyone out of work and, take everyone's gun. It's just, I get it, but a lot of this stuff is really being amplified by political parties and the media to get people so hyped up that they tune in. It's really financially beneficial for political parties. They get donations, they get to run their candidates, they get a lot of votes, which helps them, fundraise. And then you also have the media companies who work hand in hand with them. Is they're just pushing this narrative and this story on both sides, and that it really hypes people up to the extent that I've heard people that are typically left wing saying they feel unsafe or have felt unsafe in the last 4 years. They felt like it was the most difficult 4 years of their lives, and in my mind, it's just like, where are you getting this from? I understand Trump's rhetoric is, really different and very negative. I didn't personally care for it. But the emphasis that people put on the presidency when it doesn't have a ton of effect on your daily life, to then say that is the worst 4 years of my life is, I think, a huge over-exaggeration. Like you've allowed yourself to get worked up to that point to where someone who you've never met has ruined your life, right? I'm just going to look at this post real quick. I had this post pulled up. I'm not going to say the person's name, but they tweeted out, I literally just held my husband crying, repeating, "It's over," again and again. This has been the worst 4 years of my life. And then, I've had some other people on my Facebook feed post, I don't have the words to say it, but I just want you guys to know we survived. Like that level of almost a disconnect from reality, and this just hyper, to get worked up into a frenzy to that point where everything rides on this one individual's position thousands of miles away from you. It just kind of speaks to the level of disconnect that we have in politics and the level of just unfactual and unbased in reality kind of perspective that we all have, and also speaks to why we're so divided. Is you can't, if someone if someone is actually destroying this person's life for the worst 4 years of their life, absolutely. If that was actually happening, that's horrible. This person destroyed this person's life for 4 years and we barely survived. Like, if these things are real, then that's a real problem. However, if reality is that not a ton has actually changed, and there's so much data, maybe I don't even know how to dive into that exactly, but to ascribe to one person that much power over your life speaks to something else. I don't think it's very much based in reality. And if again, if it is the case that this one individual being the president has caused so much damage to everyone, let me just throw this out there. Maybe the president has too much power. So I think one of those things, probably both of those things, is true. I think the president has way too much power, and that's partially why everyone's so worked up about it. And then the other piece is the media and the political parties that want to solidify their base and want ratings and want views and that kind of thing. So it's just a big machine that froths everyone up, and so that everyone's at each other's throats, to where people are unfriending each other, and calling each other horrible things online and in person. It's just to a level that I think is almost dangerous. I think we need some good mental health help. I think we need to take a step back, take a breather. So yeah, and I've just touched on some of the posts from, I assume, left-wing people that have voted for Biden and are now very happy about it. There was one post, and now, of course, the Republicans, the conservative wing of the U.S., is very salty about the loss. I'm going to read. There was a viral post that went around immediately after the declaration that the prediction that Joe Biden was the presumptive nominee. I'm just going to read it again. I'm not going to call any individual person out. But because it was just a viral post, it was one of those copy and paste, share with all your friends, you don't have the balls to share it, or whatever those posts say, or share if you have 7 years of bad luck, or, you know what I'm talking about. All right. So I'm going to read this. If Joe wins, congratulations to you all who voted for him. I hope you get all of the free things that you voted for. I wish the best of luck to all small business, gun and landowners. By the way, the grammar in this post is awful, and the spelling isn't great either. But anyway, sorry. When gas prices are soaring, taxes are high, and you can't afford the extras of life, look back and think how good the last 4 years were. You can hate Trump, but his policies helped this country. The grass isn't greener on the other side. Most of the time, it's fertilized by the poop emoji. You guys know what that is? Of course you know what that is. It's the poop emoji. It's got the little googly eyes on like a big steaming pile of poop. So most of the time it's fertilized by poop emoji. So make sure you hug an oil worker today, because they are worried sick if they will have a job in the next year. I hope you look at our farmers, factories, and steel industries, because they will get shipped back to China. Make sure you tell a soldier thanks for serving this country, because our military will be downsized and not get raises. I don't care if you agree with me or not. I wish the best for this country. I stand for the flag and kneel before God until my last breath. I wish peace, not war. But when you tread on my land and want to take my guns, you will have a fight. You can only rob the middle class so much before they break. Time will tell the truth on this election. I will not argue, burn cities, loot, rob, steal because my president didn't win. I will go to work, pay taxes, raise my children, and do what's right. So this post, it's kind of got that like air of like moral superiority and like reconciliation, but it's got that undertone of like I'm very salty and angry. And so it's kind of like that poised anger thing. This is one of the more tame posts that I've seen, but just if you, like me, know a decent amount about economic theory, economic policy, you'll have picked out many economic fallacies within that post. And it just kind of goes to this, like, it speaks to a narrative. So if you get your information from, maybe a pro-Trump or conservative leaning news organization, they'll repeat a lot of these slogans like ship jobs back to China, or, take our guns, and all these things that people are so scared of. And I think that, again, that speaks to why people are so scared of the other side, and why people are so upset about this election, is because there's all of these repeated kind of slogans and things that, again, if you repeat something enough, somebody's going to believe it. At least whoever you're telling is probably going to believe it eventually. And so this is just a series of slogans and phrases that really don't bear out in real life and are kind of just rife with economic fallacies. And this kind of stuff is everywhere. It's kind of insane. I'm both entertained by the level of just hyperbole on both sides, but I'm also slightly concerned. I'm honestly concerned for someone's mental health if they've allowed who is president to impact them so negatively for 4 years to where they can't even function correctly. That speaks to, I think, a deeper mental health issue. And then I'm also very, very concerned about these kind of viral posts that spread a lot of these economically illiterate and irrational and counterfactual slogans and ideas, because then these ideas get perpetuated and then we just have to deal with them later at later times. So actually, I'm not going to go through this entire list. That wasn't the point of this episode of like all of the economic fallacies here. But if you want to check it out, I did write an article specifically about this post, talking about the economic fallacies within them, talking about protectionism, trade, talking about military budgets, military spending. I didn't take a position per se for or against these things, but what I did was counter, hey, if Biden is president, this isn't necessarily going to happen. And also Trump was president, and the things that you say he did, he didn't exactly do. So I kind of just dispel some of the myth. I'm going to do a later episode. I think I have got a really great special for you guys coming up. I have to wait. I'm looking maybe 2 weeks from now, maybe 3 weeks from now. I'm going to have a guest on who is hands down the the best expert you could possibly have on protectionism and trade. And I think you guys will like that episode. I think it'll be a really informative episode. So I'm going to wait to dispel some of those myths, and I'm going to wait to kind of counter some of those arguments and kind of propose kind of a better, okay, so this is wrong, but what do we do? So that episode I will promote heavily. I'm not going to tell you what it is just yet because it's going to be a surprise, but I think you guys will like it. So just the election is just, it's over. I'm really kind of glad it's over. I'm a little bit sad, but I'm kind of glad that maybe we can just kind of bring it down a little bit. But in the meantime, I'm trying to take advantage of a lot of these fallacies that are going around and trying to dispel some of those myths. And so that maybe we inject a little bit of economic literacy and just like rational thought into the discussion. Like, don't be so crazy to where the president's going to ruin your life for 4 years. And also don't make really, really dumb economic arguments, because then the next election cycle, you're going to be looking for somebody that is doing this stuff, which has actually turned out to be really, really bad. So I want to talk a little bit about like moving forward, like what is a Biden presidency probably going to look like. I made a prediction about who was going to win the presidency, and I was wrong, not by much. I was pretty darn close. And yeah, you have to give me a little bit of credit. That was kind of a long shot. So that was fun. But so here's what I'm gonna guess we're gonna see in a Biden presidency, and I'm gonna base this off of both policies that he has favored in his career, what he's done under the Obama-Biden ticket from 2008 to 2016. And then also just kind of like understanding that he's a politician and he's a good politician, and not in the statesman sense, but in the sense that he knows he's been in politics for 48 years. So he knows what he needs to do to stay and be in power. So I think first thing, obviously we're going to get a very large stimulus plan. I think both he and Trump both signaled that they would be looking at a between $3 and $4 trillion stimulus. And I think the markets have reacted to that a little bit. I think one of the issues that the markets have been having is that the stock prices are not necessarily grounded to earnings, because if you actually look at the PE ratio, the price to earnings ratio of most stocks, it's absolutely astronomically higher than it should be. All of those calculations point to a huge bubble in the United States economy. So really, stock prices are based off of whether or not we get economic stimulus and bailouts, because that's really what the profits are going to be based off of in a lot of the U.S. based companies. So under the Biden administration, it looks like we would get a slightly larger stimulus than under a potential Trump administration. So the markets have reacted positively so far. But I think that could potentially be offset by the actual uh, the the popping of the bubble. Um, it's hard to pinpoint exactly where the bubble is. I think it's probably an economy-wide bubble, just because if you're looking at where interest rates have been causing a lot of malinvestment into particular sectors, into it's been a lot of money that has been injected into the system through artificially low interest rates. And we'll do an episode on why interest rates are insanely important, and why if you mess with them, you're going to every single time create bubbles or some kind of misalignment of capital or misallocation of resources, which then you have to the market will then fix it one way or another. It's just how long is it gonna take? Because the reason why there's a specific capital structure and a structure of production is because that is the most efficient way to do it. So if you artificially cheapen the price of money, which is an interest rate, you then force that money into new and actually unprofitable, not necessarily in the bubble, but outside of the bubble, an unprofitable and unsustainable, I should say, trajectory and capital structure. And so you create these bubbles, and so the lower interest rates are for longer, the bigger and more broad the bubble is. And we've had insanely low interest rates for many years, going on almost a decade. So this bubble is huge. I think it's everywhere. It could even potentially be in treasuries, which would be really, really bad for the dollar. And that's a whole other economic can of worms. But we'll dive into that one episode. I'm not ready to do that yet because I'm still gathering a lot of the economic data that I want to look at and talk about. But that will be on the horizon. I think that's probably coming next year, next summer to the end of next year. So I think a lot of the stimulus will kind of initiate the popping of that bubble. It'll stimulate a lot of short-term, lower order goods, and will actually cause a large amount of malinvestment in the short run, which we're really going to have to pay for. So I think it'll be a sequence of several stimuluses, perpetual low interest rates. The Fed's already said that they're holding interest rates at between 0 and 0.24%, the overnight window for banks, indefinitely, which basically means forever. And there's so many people that don't really think that we're gonna go through any kind of recession outside of the COVID recession. I think the COVID recession is completely separate from what's coming. So I think early in Biden's administration will be plagued by serious economic downturns. I think we'll have lots of stimuli, as in stimulus packages. We'll have really low interest rates. So there's going to be a lot of economic turmoil in the United States. And again, the reason why I want to touch on economic policies is because this could be a good thing for, fiscal conservatives, is Biden's going to get blamed for a lot of the policies that were late Obama era, all of Trump era, and continuing into Biden administration era policies. Like this, it's one continuous policy. Not a lot's going to change economically speaking, but what will happen during a Biden presidency is you will have an economic downturn, a significant downturn, a recession, and so Biden will probably get blamed by the conservatives for that, and so that could be an interesting development. I think the other piece that we have to look at is Biden has voted for or pushed for every single military intervention that has come up under his stints in Senate and as VP. So I think we are probably going to get a new war. So that's one thing we haven't had in a couple of years. We're in 7 active military conflicts. We are in 150 countries around the world, and we spend more money militarily speaking than the next 10 largest countries combined. But I think that due to the economic turmoil combined with Biden's propensity for war, I think we're going to get a war. And I think a lot of the justification for the war will be both economically and maybe who knows? It could be humanitarian excuse. It could be, national defense. It could be, I don't know what it's going to be. But the other piece that they're going to try to push is that war is going to be good for the economy because, don't you know that World War II pulled us out of the Depression, and we're going to have an episode on that too. So I can't wait till after the election so that we can really get back to like some of these historical episodes so we can set the precedent for, looking forward as to how do we analyze economic and foreign policies. So we'll do an episode on the Great Depression and what actually happened there as well. So again, I think we're going to go through a little bit of economic turmoil, not specifically related to Biden, but he'll preside over it and continue the policies that are causing it and making it worse. I think we will probably enter into a new war, which will absolutely be, acceptable to blame him fully for that. And I don't think there's going to be significant like gun confiscations, like a lot of the right wing's talking about. It's possible. I think they're talking about background checks, but I think just politically, Biden's a politician. I don't think he's really going to do anything too like radically, objectionable to where it's going to hurt his reelection chances. I don't think he's going to do a lot of. I think he's going to be fairly centrist. I think he's going to be like a Bush Obama kind of politician. I think he might do some, kind of menial tweaking here and there. I think he might do some kind of background check thing. He's definitely going to try to reinstate Obamacare and fool with that system a little bit, similar to what the Republicans wanted to do, repeal, replace. We want our name on it. Biden's like, my name's already on this one. Let's go back to this one. So I think that's going to be something he's going to do and tout a little bit. He's talked about raising taxes on high earners, I think over $400,000. That will probably happen. He's talking about raising the corporate tax rate back to what it was. So again, not a ton is going to change there. I think out of all the policies, that might be one of the more significant ones besides war, is raising taxes, especially on corporations, because the corporate tax is kind of a pass-through tax. It doesn't actually tax the corporation, it taxes the consumers. The corporation just passes all the costs through. It really doesn't matter how much you tax them. Essentially what you're doing is you're increasing cost of goods and decreasing standard of living of consumers. So I don't like corporate taxes specifically for the reason that it actually hurts poor people more than it hurts the corporation. Corporation doesn't care what the tax rate is. All it does is hurt their volume that they can sell because they have to raise prices. So it really doesn't help a lot of people to increase the corporate tax rate, and it just makes them like go to Delaware or move offshore. And so you actually reduce tax revenue when you increase the corporate tax rate as well. So it's not a great policy. I don't particularly like it. So that should go up. Biden's been talking about some kind of version of the Green New Deal. So again, I think I talked last episode, he was for it, but then he's like, no, I'm not for it. But his website says he's for it. I'm going to be honest. I don't think he's actually going to do it. Again, he's a politician. It's fairly controversial. I think he'll make some attempts to make it look like he's doing it. I think he may institute. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think he's going to do a lot of like platitude type stuff, to where he's going to get back into the Paris Climate Accords, which, by the way, if you don't know anything about the Paris Climate Accords, they were kind of this, a lot of the leading nations in the world went to sign to like the Paris Climate Summit or something like that. And they signed these non-binding kind of like platitude type agreements. They weren't actually even agreements. They were just kind of like commitments, but they had no legal binding whatsoever to reduce some carbon emissions by some certain date. So it was never legally binding. It was just kind of like a resolution, right? So if like a committee issues a resolution, it's like, hey, we support this or we don't support this. So it's essentially what the climate accords were, but it made a big deal when Trump pulled out of them or rescinded them. So I think Biden is going to do that. He's going to get back into the Paris Climate Accords. I think he is probably going to. A lot of people are concerned that he's going to decimate the domestic oil industry. He said because we want to transition away from oil. So I mean, private market estimates assume that that the new emerging technologies for energy on the market will have outcompeted oil by 2050. And so then it just so happens that Biden's proposal is to start phasing out oil use by 2050 or in 2050. So I think he'll probably do some kind of resolution to where, kind of like they do with the auto industry, where it's like, by this date, we will have to be at this percentage of whatever. So for auto industry, it's like emissions. For oil production, it could be we need to be like this percentage oil and this percentage, other energy sources. But it kind of just so happens that market predictions, if the government did nothing, would probably phase out oil by 2050 anyway. So it's really, again, it's not going to change too much. It may increase energy prices slightly in the short term, just in preparation for those kinds of things. And I think it's a strategical political move for Biden to do something like that, because he has a base of people that are very concerned about climate change and oil use and those kinds of things, environmental crises. And so I think he's going to do a lot of those kind of like rhetorical and kind of here's a really like a non-binding commitment, kind of like what they call red meat to your base or whatever. So I think he's going to do some things like that. I don't think there's going to be a ton that's going to change on that front. Yeah, but it'll be interesting. I think it'll be a good change of pace to kind of counter some of the arguments. I spent a lot of the Trump era kind of countering a lot of the misconceptions from the right, whether it be economic fallacies, especially protectionism and trade, free markets. Basically, now the right is against free markets now. So I spent a lot of time on those, but I think it'll be a nice change of pace to kind of tackle some of the more economic illiteracy from the left and the policy illiteracy from the left, which could be good. So I hope you guys are ready for a little bit of a change in pace. It could be fun. I think at the end of the 4 years, you're kind of like, I'm kind of tired of these arguments a little bit. So it could be fun to get a different perspective to kind of challenge and talk about. So I'm sort of looking forward to it in a way. I don't think a ton's going to be super different, like all of this crazed, hyperbole online, I don't think is really going to be warranted by much, but I think it will introduce different arguments, even though the actual policies won't change that much. The one thing I am concerned about is the wars. And taxes probably will go up, standard of living will go down, but then again, it's gone down under Trump anyway, so that's not going to change too much. But anyways, I don't want to get too deep into that. I think it'll be an interesting next 4 years. I'm going to get slightly conspiratorial right now. This is just a little prediction. I like throwing little tiny predictions. It's kind of like look back and see if I'm right. So I think if you guys remember that running up to this election, Nancy Pelosi was kind of floating the idea of using the 25th Amendment against Trump to try to get him out of office. The 25th Amendment is used when the president is incapacitated, whether like physically, like when Reagan got shot, he had to go have surgery, and so they invoked the 25th Amendment while he was under, and they passed power to the VP at that time, and so the idea is that when a president is proven to be unable to perform the duty of president, then it shifts to the vice president. So Nancy Pelosi didn't ever do anything with it, but her and a lot of the Democrats were floating the idea of using the 25th Amendment against Trump, saying that he was like, mentally unstable and unfit to be president, I think was the claim. I don't think that they ever intended to use the 25th Amendment against Trump. I think they intend to use the 25th Amendment against Biden. And I know that sounds a little crazy, but I feel that like the political strategist mind, just like looking at it from like a political strategy, it makes sense because that way you don't look like a hypocrite. And Biden was not anyone's first choice for the Democrats. He kind of was just the safe choice. Nobody really likes him. He's got a terrible record on so many things. He's obviously, old and potentially senile, or looking that way. There's a lot of those rumors out there. He doesn't look. I went back and I looked at when he was VP. He was spot on. When he was a senator, he was spot on. Like he was very, very good. Watching him this past year, you can see there's a huge difference. And especially as people get older, that kind of mental decline happens very quickly, unfortunately, and it's painful to watch. I've had to watch it. So I think that the Democratic Party is setting themselves up to use the 25th Amendment on Biden, to make it not look like they're hypocrites because they floated the idea against Trump. So that's my little conspiracy for the whole thing. It doesn't really mean anything, but it could be interesting to see if that plays out. And I like kind of making this little, backdoor political kind of predictions, because I think the political mind is very different than what you and I might do. It's just, private individual citizens. So here's what I really, really want to talk about. I know I so long-winded about the presidential election, but here is the real winner in 2020. Ballot initiatives across the United States have. I'm very happy with them. There's only a couple of them I didn't really particularly care for, but what was it? Let's see. Alaska tried to do ranked choice voting, which I do like ranked choice voting. That actually did not pass. But let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 states. So we've got Arizona. We have Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota all voted to legalize marijuana, which I thought was kind of amazing. I think over 37 states now have some form of, whether it's medical or decriminalization or straight up legalization of marijuana. We're getting there. And, I think the drug war is one of those things that people are starting to realize it's very similar to alcohol, especially when it comes to marijuana. A lot of the hard drugs people are still hung up on. But I think the harm versus the good, the cost benefit analysis of the drug war, especially when it comes to marijuana, is clearly in favor of marijuana. And I think the polls, last time I checked, it was, mid 70% of Americans want to legalize marijuana. It's not worth, your tax dollars being used to go enforce these marijuana restrictions. And you just hear so many stories of people that use marijuana for personal use, and their lives are ruined, because they go to jail, or they lose a father, or they lose a family member, they lose a brother or sister, or they're using it medically and then they get arrested, and so now they're in jail and still have their medical condition. So I think enough of that combination has really started to turn the tides on marijuana legalization, which I think is huge and will be a great move forward for civil liberties and peace. And honestly, I don't do this enough, but like the moral implication of you own your body, you get to decide what you put in your body, and it's not the government's business to control your body. It's just not. You can't tell me what to eat. You can't tell me where to sleep. All these things that are just very personal. Like what I put in my body is very personal. There's a moral argument there. I own my body. I own my life. I own my freedom and my liberty around me to do what I want, as long as I don't hurt anyone. And so to violate that, even if you argue that it may have some net benefit for society, it's still morally kind of at least like questionable or wrong, right? It's like, I don't like what you're doing, so I'm going to put you in a cage. I think it's just a really flawed moral argument. Like that's the moral argument, is I don't like what you're doing, therefore I'm going to put you in a cage even though you're not hurting anyone, and potentially get shot, like what we saw with Breonna Taylor, and countless other people. I think it's much more a drug war issue than anything else. And what happened with alcohol, right? You have this alcohol prohibition, and then all of a sudden Al Capone, like those things just aren't not interrelated. They are related. Al Capone would not have had the money in the empire if the government had not made alcohol illegal, and then people wouldn't have died from alcohol use. Basically, so you could buy alcohol at the store, right? And you know exactly what proof it is, how much alcohol, it's right on the label, how much alcohol is in there. And if you got alcohol poisoning or something, like there's something bad in the alcohol, you would probably sue the crap out of the producer, right? Like that's just, everybody knows that. So no one feels unsafe buying alcohol. but back in the 20s they did. You could potentially die. You don't know what you're drinking. You're buying it from a shady person. It was probably made in somebody's bathtub. Wood alcohol killed many, many people. And then you also have gangs that are running around murdering everyone. Valentine's Day Massacre. Where do you think that came from? People aren't just shooting each other for fun. They're shooting each other over territory and over like gang territory and products. So when you make something illegal, you create all these other industries illegal, like black market industries that end up killing civilians and killing innocents in this drug war. So honestly, decriminalizing or even legalizing marijuana will defund a lot of the drug gangs that are getting young men shot and getting bystanders shot and killed. So I think that's a great step for crime reduction and just, recognition that the government does not own your body. I think it's a huge step. So I may not agree. I don't smoke weed. I've never done any drugs at all. But I know morally I can't tell anybody not to. I don't think that I have that authority, and so therefore the government doesn't have that authority. And also I don't even care. It's like people drink alcohol, people can smoke weed. I don't care. And it's not just that I don't care. I think it's wrong to impose that on somebody else. Just because I believe one thing, like I don't personally enjoy it, doesn't mean that I'm going to go to my neighbor and like beat him up and say, you can't do that. I think that's just wrong. So a big win for medical marijuana and marijuana legalization across the country. There was actually, not just marijuana. In Oregon, they decriminalized heroin, cocaine, and was it meth as well? But basically all the hard drugs, right? They just went straight past marijuana and was like, we're going to decriminalize everything. Just like, no, it's like 0 to 100. Yeah, just crazy. But I think this is really interesting and kind of a good thing. Now you may be hesitant. It's like, okay, I'm okay with marijuana, but these hard drugs, what is wrong with you? We're teaching our kids about. I think that this will turn out to be a great experiment and a great thing. One, again, the moral argument here still applies. As long as you're not hurting someone else, like you're not, basically hitting, stealing, murdering, whatever it is, then you should be able to free to kind of do whatever you want to do as long as you're not hurting somebody else. A lot of people say, well, crime goes up. People steal more things when they're on drugs and they get in, there's more violence. Well, those are still illegal. Like if you're on drugs and then punch somebody in the face, or you're not on drugs and you punch somebody in the face, you still punch somebody in the face, right? You still assaulted them. That's kind of how that works. So these correlations that people have in their minds, a lot of the arguments are kind of tied up in things like, well, you're just going to, lawlessness. It doesn't make you immune. Like, if you punch somebody in the face, you're going to jail for punch somebody in the face. But if you do it on drugs, well, drugs are legal, so, he's not going to jail. No, you still punch somebody in the face, okay? It doesn't give you immunity to do drugs. But what it does do is it kind of facilitates a lot of the mental health that goes into it, rehab stuff, treating a medical condition like a medical condition and not like a violent crime, because these are victimless crimes that we're talking about. And, almost half of the U.S. population in prison is because of victimless crimes like drug use. So Oregon just decriminalizes everything. Does not legalize it. You're not going to get, Walgreens selling you crack cocaine or anything like that. But if you do get caught with some of it, I think it's like $100 fine, or you agree to go seek treatment, which I think is a huge step in the right direction. It's not ideal, but it's a huge step in the right direction, treating things like a medical problem. And then also not wasting taxpayer money, putting people in jail and policing all these things. It's a very, very costly endeavor to go lock someone up for something that you just don't like. Like, I don't like you doing that, therefore I'm just going to pay to lock you up. I think if people thought about it that way, they probably wouldn't be in favor of the drug war, because you're literally paying to go lock somebody up for something that they did not do to you, right? Which, so I think thinking of it in that terms kind of helps put things into perspective. But let me talk a little bit about decriminalization in general and why I think this is a good first step in the drug war. So Portugal was the first world nation to decriminalize everything. At the time, this was in the year 2000, 1% of their population was hooked on heroin, which is astronomically high. It's insane. They had a HIV infection rate of 105 per million, which is astronomically high. It's insane. And to varying degrees less than that, you have hepatitis C, liver cancer, all these things that are related to drug use, especially intravenous drug use, was rampant throughout the country. It was falling apart. Their health system was overwhelmed. Their war on drugs was just, per capita, the spending on it was ridiculous. And they were literally falling apart. They didn't know what to do. They went with the radical idea of decriminalizing everything, and then requiring rehab versus jail time. And immediately the year after, and continuing till today, you saw a dramatic decrease in HIV infection rates from 105 per million to 4 per million. That's annualized, new infections per year. You saw overall crime drop in half. The prison population dropped by 30%. Like crime, like violent crime. So people are like, oh, people on drugs, they, commit more crimes. Well, okay, yeah, but if you decriminalize it, they're not going to be as incentivized to go, one, the price comes down for their drug use, and two, they aren't as, like once you break one law, you break more laws. That's kind of like an understood thing in psychology. So if they're not breaking the law, they have less of an incentive to go steal or beat somebody up. And then also if the price is lower, they don't have to steal from you to go keep their habit up. So there's a lot of like little psychological incentives that would explain decreased crime overall. So all of those things, okay, but we just don't want people using drugs. Overall drug use rates went down immediately, with the biggest rates of reduction in drug use from the ages of 15 to 24. So the kids. So that's usually the main argument, is that, oh, we don't want to tell the kids that it's okay to do drugs. The kids are going to all do heroin. This is a direct contradiction immediately, because you demystify it, right? So like in Europe, the drinking age is a lot lower, and they have a much lower rate of alcohol abuse. I said alcohol, right? Yeah. So in Europe, alcohol age of you can buy alcohol is like 16 or whatever. They have lower rates of alcohol abuse. They have lower rates of drunk driving. And overall, it just seems to be a really good, it's a counterintuitive thing, but once you start thinking about it, it sort of makes sense. The same thing applies with drugs. If it's decriminalized and it's not stigmatized in a way that you think you're going to go to jail, you reduce the crime associated with it, you reduce all these other things. And then you also reduce the incentive for like rebellious kids to try some things, because it's like, ooh, it's cool, it's underground. And then they ended up putting a lot more information out there about, what drugs do to you and that kind of thing. And the rates just cut in half, just absolutely. Fewer people using drugs, there's less crime, there's less people in jail. So it's like costing less money to the taxpayers. Mental health, they measure happiness and stuff like that. That went up. So just a lot of great things happened in Portugal. And so it's still decriminalized because they never had any adverse side effects. If anything, it just went better. Of course, you're going to have the people that are still going to use drugs anyway. But what you want to do is minimize the negative impact to the non-drug users, minimize the death rate of overdoses went down too, by the way, in Portugal by a significant amount. So you want to overdose, you want to eliminate or minimize the harm done to drug users, eliminate and minimize the harm done to non-drug users, eliminate the cost associated with managing drug problems, and reduce the cost associated with drug-related crimes. And the murder rate went down too. I'm just saying all these things because it has a ripple effect in the society that creates a healthier, safer, less drug prevalent society. So I think in Oregon, we're going to start seeing a lot of these things. And I think it'll be a really good test for the country. I think it'll be a really good kind of microcosm study for kind of like what marijuana is doing. Like, what was it, Massachusetts or whatever was like the first one to legalize marijuana, or California, somebody was. And everybody's like, oh no, everyone's going to, and it's like, well, actually it's not that bad. Like it's sort of okay. And then Colorado decriminalized psychedelic mushrooms a couple years ago. By the way, DC decriminalized Nature Initiative 81. They decriminalized psychedelics as well. So it was just a huge, overwhelming win for the drug war, not for the drug war, but against the drug war, and kind of like for individual liberty, individual, like, I own my body autonomy, and really kind of could have the potential of decreasing crime, decreasing negative interactions, what they call touches with law enforcement, that cause some of these problems that we see. That cause some of the civil unrest, whether, not talking in general, not talking about a specific issue, but if you decrease touches within a community of people, there's less chance of anything going wrong. So I think that'll start to happen. You'll see decreased crime. You'll see decreased drug use of hard drugs. There's actually a study that was done that showed that meth would not even be a thing if they hadn't made cocaine so expensive, and meth is astronomically worse than cocaine. It's like if you make something illegal and then so expensive that it's hard to get to, then you create crack cocaine, and then once you do that, you bid up crack cocaine, make that really expensive, start funding all the again, all this is like funding like the drug cartels and stuff. And so now we want to make it domestically, made in America. Well, guess what? Meth is made in America. And that's the reason why meth exists, is because all these other things are so expensive that the demand for a cheap, highly effective, very potent drug was still here. And so then you have these backwoods hillbillies making meth now. So because of prohibition, we now have meth, right? So I think we need to start scaling this stuff back. We need to realize we're doing more harm than good, and start letting it start treating it like a health issue and a mental health issue, which is, I think contributes to over half of people's drug use is mental health problems. So I think we need to really start treating it like mental health, physical health, medical condition. And I think we'll start to reap a lot of the benefits societally from having these things decriminalized, and really starting to get a better understanding of how it's impacting our communities. So yeah, there's those things. I just want to talk a lot about the drug decriminalization and legalization, especially marijuana, and then Oregon's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years. Keep an eye on that. The last thing I want to talk about is a ballot measure in California, of all places. They had a huge win for the free market in California. Again, people make fun of California for being like the communist state of California, the socialist state of California, whatever it is. California had a ballot initiative. I think it was in 2018. There was a big lawsuit with Uber and Lyft and a lot of other gig economy workers, where the state required them, all gig economy workers, to be employed at full time with benefits and all this stuff. And so, surprise, surprise, all of those people were fired. So you had this entire industry that is just now laid off, and it got a huge amount of backlash from the people that were unemployed now. Like, most of these people were doing it part-time just to make a couple extra bucks. They didn't want a full-time job. They either had another form of insurance, or they just wanted to work when they wanted to work. But now they have, if they did want to keep their jobs, they'd have to be full-time, set hours, all this other stuff. And plus, they didn't even have that option because they got laid off immediately. So they put that to a referendum in California. The proposition repealed the original ban on gig workers in the gig economy, and it passed by 58.6%, which is in a huge margin. It was a resounding rejection of kind of the meddling in people's choices. So every time, California, there's like, oh, we want to protect these people, give them all health insurance and stuff. But what they don't realize they're doing is they're taking away what people chose to do. These people chose to do gig economy work because that's what they wanted for whatever reason. There's probably a plethora of reasons to do it. And California said, no, we know better than you what you need for your life. We're going to take that option away, and now you're unemployed. Like, how is that better? Right? It just defies logic. And so the little bit of common sense that the individuals in California still have came through in this proposition. It was Proposition 22. It repealed the restriction on gig economy workers, which, by the way, gig economy workers were polled prior to this being on the ballot, and 85% of gig workers were for the repeal, and only 15 supported keeping it in place. Those are probably the 15 that kept their jobs. And the 85% that lost their jobs were just absolutely, let's get rid of this. I want to get back to doing my gig work. So this actually applied to freelance writers. This applied to, Uber and Lyft, and this applied to, like food delivery services and those kinds of things. All of those people were unemployed, like the small gig / cash economy. And so that was a huge win in California for the free market and the people of California. And I think that is a promising look. And I was not expecting that. And I was very, very happy to see that. So that's a win right there. All right, guys, I've been talking way too long. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. We covered a lot of things. Covered the election. What are we looking forward to with a Joe Biden presidency? Some of the ballot initiatives that passed, both talking about the drug war and how that's going to look. And again, keep an eye on Oregon. I think that's going to be a really fascinating experiment for the United States. And also free market in California. At least some people still believe in it. So, all right, guys, thanks for joining. It's been wonderful hanging out with you. Tune in. I should be putting out an episode every single week, if not more. There's a lot to talk about, and I can't wait to get back into more issue-based and historically based podcasts after this election cycle. So yeah, if you guys want to support the show, I actually have added a new page on the website, thetakeoneverything.com. Now has a page, support the show, where I will be continually adding more sponsors as they come. And so most of it's affiliate marketing. So like if you want to, check out some of the products, the marketing products, whether it be Liberty Classroom or something else, you go there, you click on it, and it's basically, I get a little kickback if you use my link. So most of it's going to be there. You can kind of peruse and browse and say, hey, I need this anyway. So you just go through my link and I get a little kickback. That's if you want to support the show. If not, I don't really care. Just listen and hang out with me and start a conversation. This should be on, if you don't follow me, I'm on Twitter at thetakeoneveryone, the number one, as in the numeral value. And I'm also on Instagram, and there's a page on Facebook, The Take On Everything. Follow me there, and I will see you guys next week. Peace.